Co-founder divorce.
With all the grit and determination, I ignored all my emotions. I literally suppressed everything. So I think just having somebody say, Monique, you're blaming yourself. Can you please just not blame yourself? The more you talk about these things, the more power you take away from it so that you can actually start healing.
Startups are cool. Founders and co-founders. We often compare them to romantic relationships. And when it works, it's amazing. But what if things don't work out? What happens when the person you're supposed to be closest makes you want to run away as far as possible? In today's episode, we meet Monique Baars, founder of Fineasy. Monique did everything by the book. She went to business school, founded a startup, found a CTO, just like everybody told her to do. And then realized that the books are just books, and reality is very different. There was no alignment in vision and values with the co-founder. They didn't pull their weight, and they caused a lot of anxiety. So what do you do when you realize for you and the business to survive, you have to remove the toxic element in this relationship? And how do you find the strength to acknowledge what's happening and seek help? Monique shares with us her journey from the early days of co-founder dating through the honeymoon period and the first cracks, all the way through to the inevitable separation. She also talks about how she found the language to describe what she was experiencing and how she found the help she needed to turn the situation around and protect both herself and the business. Let's meet Monique.
This is Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. Brought to you by Vladi and Nektarios Lolios. And remember to subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help us share it with the world.
We're excited to have you on board because you have a very interesting story. And we'd like to kind of go straight into focusing on some aspects of your story, right? So you started a business straight out of business school. You have a corporate background. So all this is led you to a certain point. I got intrigued when we had our first conversation when I heard about you going through a founder divorce, as you put it. For me, using that metaphor, that analogy we use this a lot. We use romantic relationship analogies in how you build a business.
Completely.
But what I'm curious about is what actually made you think you need to get founder married in the first place? Maybe we can start there. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about it, and you can tell us a little bit about what you do there as well.
Fantastic. So I'll start with a really quick overview of what we do. And then the best place to start is always at the beginning, right? So I'll speak to the initial marriage. My business is called Fineasy. So essentially, as the name suggests, we make finance easy. So we are a financial education provider. We make finance content really accessible to absolutely everyone, but our focus is the African market. So we're operating in Ghana, in South Africa. We'll be launching in Tanzania and Mozambique pretty soon.
Oh, brilliant.
Really, really fantastic to get that kind of scale so early on. And ultimately, we believe it's really part of human dignity to make good financial decisions, or at least informed financial decisions. And it's a really important piece to unlocking value in the financial ecosystem, especially with all the exciting financial inclusion work going on in emerging markets. So I started this business, or did a lot of the ideation and the market research, and really built the foundations of Fineasy while I was doing my MBA. For me, I used the MBA very specifically, very deliberately as a stepping stone into starting my own business. So I had the time and I had the resources to put into this idea. And I got it to a point where I was comfortable with the business model, comfortable with the content, comfortable with various elements. And then I needed to start thinking about the technology. So our business is essentially a content business delivered through technology, but I think every new business is a tech business in a lot of ways. So we deliver our content through a chatbot. So in that way, we're a chatbot business. So I got the business to the point where I was ready to start thinking about the technology. And as a technology business, this is quite an important piece. Although my initial hypothesis was it's possible to do it. So let me figure out the content and let me get some meat there, so that when I start thinking about the technology, I've got something to work with. And at this point, I'm not personally technical. I've come from a very corporate background. So I went onto LinkedIn and I messaged, I searched for literally machine learning education, because I knew I needed someone who understood the machine learning space but applied to the education context. And a number of people came up. This is like 3 years ago now, so there's a lot more people that would come up now if you did that. But a handful of people came up, and I messaged them and I said, hey, this is what I'm working on. Could I get 15 minutes of your time just to help me structure my thinking about what this technology development looks like? Is it possible? Do I need, then getting into all the more detailed questions, do I need to outsource? What does this actually look like? I had no idea. And through that journey, I met someone who, was young and enthusiastic and had a limited amount of experience, but almost the perfect CV. And we hit it off. And it was almost like, this concept of a CTO just fell straight into my lap.
How did it feel when you were typing that into the LinkedIn and, being a solo founder and looking for that other part of yourself, right? Somebody so critical.
Yeah. So, I was all hustle in the early days, to be honest. So I was, this is how I found a lot of the initial members of my team, because I realized that although I have a phenomenal network, everyone is kind of very corporate, right? So if I needed to fill roles with, operations and marketing, that was going to be easy. But actually, if I needed technical skills and I needed, roles in specific markets, LinkedIn was my go-to. Finding people who looked like they had the right experience, messaging them and saying, hey, this is what I'm working on. If this in any way sounds interesting, let me know and we can have a quick conversation. So that was my go-to hustle for how to find people who had the right skills and were interested in what I was doing. Everybody, said, absolutely, let's put in some time, because it's interesting, right? It's new. It's
very encouraging, actually. I'm just looking on all of us here. I'm like, I'm not sure if I ever used it in that way, but I think for a lot of people out there who are listening, I think this is really encouraging to hear that it can be as simple as being open, authentic, and going out there with your skin.
Yeah, absolutely. I found storytellers in various markets in exactly the same way. So it wasn't just a one-trick pony. It actually worked for me multiple times. And it's still my go-to, to be honest. Moving to a new market, my starting point is I need to build locally relevant content. All my friends are, from those markets are working, in investment banks, or, they don't have a huge amount of extra time. I need to find someone who is a storyteller or who has this experience and expertise and can really do a good job. And LinkedIn's where I start. But anyway, so I didn't go into that experience looking for a CTO, but I did have this underlying potentially insecurity, but this underlying need to have a technical co-founder, because everything I read, every blog I read, every step-by-step for first-time founders, every incubator and accelerator program was saying, don't even bother applying unless you have a co-founder. And, is it your first time and you're a sole founder, really good luck raising money. So a lot of the narrative was saying, hey, Monique, you need a co-founder. And if you have a tech product, you really need a technical co-founder. So this was always in the back of my mind, although I'm on so many different founder groups where, the most talked about topic of conversation is where can I find a CTO? So I knew this was going to be a hard challenge, but I wasn't tackling it yet. But it kind of happened organically. So one of the people I spoke to in those very early days was interested in the idea, was interested in the progress I was making. And we just kept in touch for the next few months. And it got to the point where he said, look, I'm willing to quit my job because I really believe in what you're doing. So can I join you? But I want to join you as a co-founder with significant ownership. And that kind of set the starting point. It's quite a complex starting point, to be honest, because a lot of the work had been done, right? I'd put the capital was mine. A lot of this was at least a year and a half of sweat equity in the making. So we got somewhere. So to have someone join in a co-founder position at that point, essentially wanting to be 50-50 partners, but then having to realize that actually that doesn't make a lot of sense because we're not starting at the beginning. It was a complex starting point.
How did that make you feel actually when he came with this proposal?
I mean, it's scary. It's really scary because this concept of a co-founder, especially somebody who's, really much a partner in this, with a good amount of taking on a good amount of risk, it was scary for me because firstly, I didn't know him for massive amounts of time, right? So I'd done the best I could. I'd spent months trying to get to know him and trying to, work together in different capacities. And I'd done as much research and due diligence as I could. But it's still quite scary letting somebody in, understanding that this is a big decision. This is a really big commitment. It is essentially a marriage. And going into that with someone who I hadn't known for the longest amount of time and, I hadn't worked with very closely or directly. But also there's a little bit of a control piece, right? Which is around, this was my business to that point. This was very much my baby. This was, what I spent all my time thinking about. And, letting somebody into that to then share this baby, it was definitely a transition. It took me I had to really get a lot of courage to say, okay, this is ours, and I now trust you with my baby. I now trust you as a partner, and I'm going to think about the future of this business with both of us in the picture, not just, how am I going to make this happen?
You've given us so many words already. There's trust there. I like that you're referring, the whole metaphor, right, with the marriage and the baby. There's a whole kind of, it's very different ties you build with people when you use this terminology, right? It's interesting because what you've experienced is not uncommon, right? We know so many stories, and by the way, we've all been through similar experiences ourselves, right? So letting go and entrusting a significant part of your life to somebody because you've invested a year and a half and all that is substantial, and it's understandable that when you haven't done this before, especially, also just playing back a little bit what I'm hearing is you've done this in a very structured, in a very kind of planned way, whereas I think somebody who might have been a little bit younger would have probably gone into this a little bit more naively and not reading all the books and not going to business school to do this. So there's also this, okay, I know I have to do this. I know I need a CTO. You don't have the courage, that you haven't had the chance to build the courage to go, maybe I don't. Maybe I just need somebody to hire somebody like that. Right? But so you commit to somebody. And at the beginning, like in romantic relationships, the hormones and the positives are on the surface, and you have no idea what could be lying underneath, right?
Exactly.
So did you feel once you've put your trust into that person and you agreed on the commercials and the equity and everything else, did you have a honeymoon period? Did you have a period where everything was rosy and hunky-dory and you were building this together?
Absolutely. I think that initial period of the commercials was quite complex, quite challenging. I wouldn't say, that was the honeymoon. But after that, once we'd agreed on everything, there was definitely a honeymoon period where, for me, a big part of wanting, this business partner was having somebody, what I would say to him was, I need someone in the trenches with me, right? It's one thing, I feel like I'm fighting battles a lot of the time, and I'm in it 100%, but there's just something really comforting about having somebody in the trenches. And, for the first time, I had someone in the trenches with me, both physically and metaphorically, right? We were, there was good banter. There was a lot of the really positive sides to working with people. So there was definitely a honeymoon period that was very much around that feeling supported, feeling, like you're not alone in this really big, insurmountable task.
I'm curious here, just to take it a little back. So on that initial part, you said that you guys agreed on conditions, right? Was it that you put into a place something, obviously probably there was a shareholders agreement. Did it also include some clauses around what is going to happen if it's not going to go well?
So we were very good at again, being very structured and having done all the reading, we were very good at the documentation. So, once we'd agreed on an equity split, we had good leaver and bad leaver clauses. We had, the equity had, there was a 1-year cliff with vested equity. So a lot of the downside in that way was limited. But what I didn't do out of fear, which in hindsight is really interesting, was I wasn't very specific on what exactly I wanted him to do and what exactly performance looked like. Because I went into this as, we are equal partners, there's an assumption that, you're going to deliver on these general things. I wasn't very clear on these are the specifics that you're going to be measured on. And if you don't meet them, there's consequences. I was more in general, these are the pieces of the business that you're going to own and you have to make it work, right? You have to do a really good job. Because I treated it as a very much equal partnership relationship.
Sounds
right?
like, a co-founder basically.
But this is the point. So there was a lot of that, being a co-founder, a lot of that was, I need to trust this person. I need to, really give ownership. I need to, not micromanage. There's a lot of that, how do I want this relationship to be as equals, which made me apprehensive to be very super structural, super micromanagey in those initial phases. We were very good with the equity piece, but not very good with what exactly the deliverables were, or what are the implications of not actually delivering.
You are listening to Naked by The Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core.
But there's also something about, if you start a business, you also have to be idealistic to some extent and believe against all odds that things will work out, right? And it translates into so many different aspects of what you're building. So I can totally see how you're kind of also beating yourself up a bit about not having had that in that agreement. But on the other hand, why would you, right? Because you believe that everything else is fine, right?
Exactly.
Did you feel that he had the same kind of attitude, or did you have an inkling about how you guys actually work together? So whenever there was conflict, which is one of the big things why, well, how kind of things manifest, but also why people fall out, right? Is what were the first kind of inklings of you don't manage conflict very well together?
Yeah. So this is a really great question, because before we actually started working together full time, I wanted to test these things, right? Understanding that, human relationships, conflict, we have to be able to have, manage these hard times. So we spent at least a month, if not more, before actually working together full time. While he was still employed, he would come over after work and we'd, try and burn the midnight oil or work together on weekends and really try and put some pressure on the environment to see how we really work together, especially within pressure environments. So I tried to test this as much as possible. But I think it takes a while for as a person, it takes a while for your true personality to come out. And I think, with any new relationship, there's a lot you kind of hide, and there's a lot of, you put on a show. And I think everybody does this to different extents, right? But everybody's putting on a show in the beginning. And it took at least 4 months for me to sort of see through a lot of the show and to say, actually, I'm not as convinced as I was before. And then you speak to that optimism, right? You speak to you've got to be optimistic, otherwise this is the wrong kind of thing. So, once I had that realization, the performance isn't quite what I expected it to be, I firstly really believed in potential, and still to this day believe in potential. So I said, okay, well, how can we make this work? How can we get this potential out? But in the end ended up overcompensating in that way. So I ended up putting a lot of this strain on myself to create environments, or to create discussions, to create a way for him to reach the potential that I believed he had. But ultimately that just came back on myself.
What was happening on the other side? I'm curious how he reacted to your nudges.
Vladi, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Before we go there.
Yeah.
Does this whole potential versus performance
resonate?
Oh,
big time. And not only that, but also this, structured approach. Monique, I think we should certainly get a coffee together, after this one. It's like, but even more so. So what was the reaction there from his side when you approached it with this open arms, open heart, mind, soul, let's talk?
I started my career as a management consultant, which sort of prepared me for feedback. A big part of the management consulting journey is, periodic, very often feedback, where it's a lot about, this is what you're doing well, but actually, here's where you can improve. So that was quite ingrained in my working culture and the way I work. So I made that clear at a high level in the beginning, saying, listen, I really think feedback is important, and I'm actually going to deliberately put, feedback sessions into our calendars, because this is the first time I'm doing this. So I'm relying on your feedback so that I can improve. But actually it's a good way for us to stay on the same page. And the response in the beginning was obviously a lot of the show, that's a great feedback. Let me try that. But also my feedback in the beginning was a lot of, disguised with a lot of the potential. So it was quite friendly, I'd say. And after a few months, it really got down to the nitty gritty of being able to say, listen, I'm really needing more from you. I'm struggling with this. I've been asking for this for a really long time. I'm not feeling supported in this area. I'm struggling to make decisions because I'm not getting this data or this, this information that I really need from you. And those conversations were never good. So I was met with a lot of defensiveness, eventually a lot of aggression, a lot of sort of turning the tables and saying, you're unrealistic, you have unrealistic expectations, you need to calm down. It was a couple of months where I was, really trying to maintain that strong feedback culture and just being met with a really negative, a really toxic conversation. And to be honest, after that point, I became less and less frequent with my feedback and actually developed a fear for being, opening up and saying I'm needing more from you, because it was met with such a negative response.
Mm.
So when you're in a startup, in an early stage business, where it's all about the challenges you have with building a business, and you bring somebody in who's supposed to be your rock and your support and your sidekick and your confidant, and then suddenly you realize not only don't you have that confidant and support, it also adds an additional level of stress. How much of that stress actually colored the rest of the business?
The volume of that stress, to be honest, only a few months after this whole ordeal for me has ended, am I really starting, it's coming back, it's flooding back. So I suppressed a lot of that. I suppressed a lot of those emotions, and really my response in those moments, having never experienced something like this before, was very much to just fight, to suppress the emotion and just not fight with him, but fight to make this work. So I would, again, turn it on myself, try and, I ended up spending so much time in my head thinking, this isn't working. How can I make this work? How can I be better? How can I make the situation better? How can I communicate better? And I put a huge amount of pressure on myself to make this work. And that obviously, that impacted every aspect of my business, it impacted me personally significantly from a confidence perspective, from a just general happiness perspective, from a time perspective. I mean, the amount of time, at one point I estimated I spent at least an hour and a half, if not 2 hours a day, thinking, analyzing, reading. Funny, you talk about marriage. I literally read books about, marriages and how to turn a marriage around, which I've never had to read in my personal life. But all of a sudden I was desperate for a way to fix this, because it was very clearly not working. And the rest of my team could feel it. They could feel, as much as I tried to hide it, they could feel that I wasn't myself. And they could feel, there were small tensions that kind of slip through the cracks when you're trying to put up a face. So I think it was obvious to everyone. But my response, even in those moments, was, how can I just force this to work, right? Because there's every reason possible for me not to let this not work.
Yeah, so what I hear there is resilience. Like you were trying to build up from that place of adversity, or that low where you found yourself, and being resilient. And we've heard this in our previous conversation as well, that there is a limit to when actually we are trying to build up that resiliency for ourselves, and where it stops being useful, really. And I'm just curious, what was happening for Monique when you closed the door at the end of the day and you found yourself, with your partner or on your own in that state of being, in that phase of the business? What was happening inside?
Yeah. So I'll respond in two ways. The one, what was happening for me was a lot of that thinking and, a lot of angst, a lot of anxiety, because this clearly was not working, and I felt it permanently. Right. And I was constantly thinking of ways to improve it. So I would go to my now husband or my friend, and I'd be like, listen, this just happened. Like, am I going crazy? How could I have responded better? How, this is what I sent and this is how you responded. How can I learn from this? Right. So it was pervasive in all my life, because I was constantly, either thinking of ways to fix it, or having these interactions over message or email that were just, making it 1,000 times worse. And it really wasn't working. Your point about resilience, I feel like during those times, I was grit and determination. I was not going to let this fail. And I was just going to suffer through it. But what I've learned in hindsight is that I didn't have enough resilience, because I think the difference between grit and determination and resilience is the emotional aspect. And with all the grit and determination, I ignored all my emotions. I literally suppressed everything. I was like, you can, put all your feelings in a box. You just need to power through and make this happen. And the problem with that is, the body doesn't forget all these emotions. So once I was, over this experience in a safe space, all these emotions just flooded back. It was almost debilitating, just all this emotion. I was like, what is going on with me? And then I realized, you know what, Mon, you've spent a year really just powering through, but not feeling. And it's hard and it's scary. And, you've been in a really toxic relationship and you've just stopped feeling. And then all of a sudden, these emotions just came back. And I was like, you know what? That's the difference. The resilience is really learning to deal with those emotions, learning to feel and adapt and deal with those emotions while you're going through it, rather than suppressing it. So for me, that's been probably the best learning from this really terrible experience, is just, I need to get better and I'm actively building the tools to be able to feel and not just suppress while I'm going through hard things.
I've got this visual of you standing in a room in your house and holding the door closed, and the room behind you is just filling with water, and you're just trying harder and harder to keep the door closed, right? And at some point somebody tells you that it stopped raining outside, and you go, And then you walk away, and suddenly this wave comes over you because the door floods open.
Exactly.
I'm really, thank you so much for sharing this. I can relate to some of it so much. I've been through a phase where I experienced conflict that I couldn't resolve, but for me it was debilitating whilst I was in it. So I would wake up and I would cancel all my meetings because I just couldn't talk to anybody. So your way of dealing with this in a way, I was just powering through it. I was just put it all in a box. That it might not have been the right thing for you at that moment, but it also takes a lot to be able to do this, and that's really kind of impressive, right? Can we go back to the wave flooding, washing over you? So when that wave of emotion, somebody at some point then comes through. Was there a trigger? Was there something where you realized, oh my God, this is what just happened? Because for us, it's important to figure out, bearing in mind that we hope that our listeners are looking for these signals and are looking to find a language to articulate these things. Where was the moment we thought, oh my God, I actually have been struggling emotionally and I didn't even know that there was a word for it or something was happening?
Yeah, so there were a combination of situations or factors, I think, that led to the wave coming through. The first was a feeling of safety. So just over a month, nearly 2 months after he had officially left the company, I was starting to feel safe without, it wasn't a logical thought. It was more just like I was feeling much safer. I was feeling more like myself. Interestingly, at exactly the same time, I started really closing big deals, and I was, my team was thriving, and there was a really big difference in the rest of the business and in myself too. But I kind of felt a safe space. And I think at that point, feeling safe, I started, I was productive and happy. And then all of a sudden I just couldn't get out of bed. And I was like, this is totally not me. I'm the person that's like out there, getting things done. How can I not leave my bed? This makes no sense. So it was 1 or 2 days of that where I couldn't logic my way out of it, right? I couldn't, talk myself into doing something, which is also very strange for me. And I have a startup coach who's a therapist who's just been the most incredible resource. And I said, okay, I think I really need to come talk to you about this because I don't actually know what's going on with me right now. And I kind of talked him through how I was feeling and what had happened. And he said, Monique, number one, you are blaming yourself. He's like, you've done everything possible to make something work and it hasn't. And you're blaming yourself. I was like, stop it. So I think just having somebody say, Monique, you're blaming yourself. Can you please just not blame yourself? That's not the right, that's not necessary. That's not the right thing to do. Was a good starting point. And then talking through, I started talking through the experiences I'd had in the last year that I'd forgotten, essentially, that I'd suppressed, right? And I started talking through, oh, this happened and this really affected me. I felt like, I felt terrible, or I just wanted to go and cry for 5 hours. And actually just starting to talk about it again made it all sort of come back to the point where, I don't generally have nightmares, but I had nightmares for a week. So like this physical manifestation of just, these emotions that I was now thinking through, working through, being quite deliberate about, working through them, not just ignoring them. But it all came from a safe space and somebody just being able to ask me the right questions so that I could get my brain, I could understand what was happening. Like, I am feeling all the things I haven't felt, and I actually need to work through them, build the tools to be able to work through them so that I can move past them without having these horrible, horrible feelings in my stomach when I see his name or when something happens. Because it is so physical.
What you're saying, Monique, it's so powerful. Like, I feel you in my stomach, really. There was I had this like year-long project where I was really invested in, and then it ended. It was unexpected, and so it finished. And I was there for the whole team to really hold them, right, to help them to actually really process the experience. And it was a little bit of grieving, which was happening in this whole cycle. And then my coach told me the same thing you've heard, which was like, Vladi, don't underestimate this. Like, we all know you're strong, but like carve out proper time for yourself to process this. Name it, reflect, feel it. And when I heard you and that permission, with what you just shared with us, that somebody gives you permission to actually do that, like it just, I bonded here with you. So I think that's something powerful, that sometimes we need other people to allow us to go and actually heal in a way, right? Like allow ourselves to do so.
You are listening to Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core.
Completely. And to be able to speak to ourselves about it in the right way, right? So to be able to say, okay, right now I am feeling grief. I'm feeling, grief. I've lost a best friend. I've lost my business partner. I'm grieving. I've lost a couple of things. I've also experienced hard things that I didn't feel at the time, and I'm now feeling them because I feel safe enough to do so. And having someone give you the permission, but also the words, the terminology, to understand what you're feeling, because I think a lot of what we feel, or a lot of the impact of what we feel, is what we tell ourselves we're feeling, right? So you can feel something, and then you can sort of convince yourself actually it's nothing, or actually you're just excited, or you can sort of tell yourself that what you're feeling is something different to protect yourself. Or at least I do that. Maybe I'm weird, but actually having somebody say this is what it sounds like you're feeling, and you just need to let yourself feel like that. You need to let yourself say, I'm actually grieving at the moment, or I'm having a really bad day because I'm processing all these emotions, I'm just getting rid of, and it's okay.
It's okay,
and it's completely okay. And I think one of the biggest healing, one of the things I did that really helped me to heal was actually speak to my team about it, not in all the gory details, but to say, listen, guys, like this has been quite a difficult experience for me. And I'm struggling with it right now. I'm struggling, with these kind of things. So, I'm just telling you because it's important that we're all on the same page, and that you're supporting me as much as I'm supporting you, and that you understand if I'm like, not super responsive on one day, it's nothing that you've done. It's just that I'm processing things. And it brought me a lot closer to my team, because I think vulnerability does that. It brings you closer to people. But it's really hard to do it in the first place because, again, all the narrative, everything you read is like, don't be vulnerable to your team, right? You have to be the strong pillar of, you have to really guide the vision and all these big things. And I'm like, well, I'm really struggling to have a big vision right now. It's hard to do that every day. And it's made the team a lot more connected, but also perform better.
It's so beautiful how you just described how vulnerability is a strength, because it is, right? It is something that the moment you are strong enough to share stuff that is difficult, you allow other people to acknowledge that and hopefully grow as well. I mean, it's actually, I was just thinking whilst you were talking, you don't need us in this conversation because you kind of mentioned all the things that you think is so important. But I'm curious about one thing that we kind of both, Vladi and you mentioned, and you said it like it's a normal thing. It's quite a leap for a lot of people to actually talk to a coach, let alone a therapist. So you having that confidence and courage to just reach out for help, and asking for help is also a really big step, right? How was that? How did you get to that point to go, you know what, I'm just going to open up here?
So I sound really confident about it now, but actually the fact that I said entrepreneurship coach, who's also a therapist, is an indication that I'm still not 100% over, those stigmas, right? Just remembering that while you're talking. The process for me was interesting because I grew up in South Africa, and my family, my context, seeing a therapist was just not a thing that you did. You just powered through. We're strong people. We don't need, to talk about our problems with other people. So the starting point was quite interesting, because it happened at a challenging time. One of I think definitely the co-founder divorce was the most challenging thing I've been through as a founder, but the one before that was raising money. And I was having a pretty challenging time from a mental health perspective with this, this concept of raising money. Because the power dynamics are all wrong. I was, desperate for cash. Felt like I was in an uphill battle trying to convince, people in the UK that actually my social impact education idea in Africa, has legs. And it was a very challenging time for me, because I felt this desperation, and I felt, a lot of the insecurities coming out. Am I too passionate? Is my deck okay? Do I come across as credible? And at that point, I was in the London Business School incubator, and a friend of mine actually said, listen, Mon, I'm struggling with the same thing. Let's see if the incubator can help us, because it's quite costly to actually get, mental health support. And the incubator said, absolutely, we've got a contact who we think is really great. We'll pay for a couple of sessions. And that was completely pivotal, because, firstly, I connected with this therapist, in the first session. But he really helped me to think about what I was experiencing, or to ask myself the right questions. It really came down to having somebody shift my thinking, or help me shift my own thinking, just by asking really smart questions. And, one session after the other, my entire stigma around this concept was just completely shattered, because I was getting so much value from, being able to talk about what I was feeling and what I was experiencing, and having somebody help me with the tools to work through it, and, to get to a good outcome, or to be happy with what was happening.
Well, there are many stories we tell ourselves for, a variety of reasons, of all the baggage we carry with ourselves from the childhood and stuff. But also there are many stories we kind of reflect by reading them in the news, right? So a lot of that actually circulates, and we think that this is the right way to do it. So what is Monique doing today to preserve that health, the balance? What is your toolkit?
So this is something I'm still perfecting. I'm definitely not an expert at this toolkit, but the things that work really well for me, I've become very good at identifying how I'm feeling, how I'm really feeling, identifying these triggers, and identifying especially the negative feelings, and being able to work through them before they actually, become, toxic to my happiness or to my productivity. So I've become really good at even predicting, okay, I'm going to be doing this, and actually that's going to be quite a big trigger for me. So let me make sure, I don't plan anything for the rest of the day, and let me just give myself the time to work through that. Whereas the old Monique would have been like, you've got an afternoon, you better get this, and this done. I'm now being really deliberate about identifying emotions, identifying triggers, and, helping myself work through them. I think sleep is another big one, to be honest. I think I used to be of the belief that, you only need to sleep a small amount of hours and it's all about productivity. But I've been really helping myself with life in general by sleeping more, by allowing myself time off. I mean, that's a big one. I think a big part of building a business is this constant anxiety, because everything can go wrong, and actually the buck stops at you. So, if it goes wrong, it's all on you, and you better just make it work. But I've really become better at, putting those boundaries in place, and, deliberately giving myself permission to have some time off, and to have some time to reflect, and to have, a day where I just think or read and not feel bad about that. I still feel bad about it. I'm trying hard to get better at not feeling bad about it. And then the last thing I'd say is I try and immerse myself in podcasts and books to help me with the vocabulary. So I'm the type of person who needs to explain things, or at least to myself, who needs to sort of be able to box things and explain them and have a story around them.
So it's so wonderful for you to kind of use these concepts and just give people pointers about maybe something that they didn't even didn't even know they needed, right? If you describe it, you can measure it. If you can measure it, you can start addressing it. It's very simple things, right?
Yeah, and if you talk about it, you can take the power away from it. That's one of the big pieces. The more you talk about these things, the more power you take away from it, so that you can actually start healing.
If you think back 4 years ago when you started the business, is there a question you wish you had the awareness or the kind of the guts to ask then to a fellow founder?
Oh man, that is a tough one. Honestly, I feel like I asked a lot of questions in the beginning, right? Because I had the privilege, I was in an MBA, I was going to conferences, I was speaking to people, and I asked a ton of questions. And the reality is, the hard questions you don't really know that you should ask. But even now, I'm struggling to think of a hard question, because I think so much of this founder journey is about experiencing it and having the people around you when you're going through it, right? So being able to ask the questions while you're going through it, because I think so much you can plan and predict so much, and you can sort of get pointers up front for how to approach certain things. But the reality is, that is, for me anyway, it's really come down to being able to ask other founders questions while I'm experiencing the things that are happening to me right now. For me, that's the most powerful. So maybe the question I'd ask, 2-3 years ago is, who is your team of founders around you that's kind of helping you navigate this journey? And how did you find them, so that I can build my own, group of founders around me? Because again, you can only plan and predict for so much, but you kind of have to get used to the fact that this is all unknown, and you're going to be, making all kinds of decisions all the time with imperfect information. So for me, what's really helpful is having people around me when I need them to be able to ask these tough questions, or just share these experiences with.
Yeah, actually having a peer group of founders, the note on which you kind of ended, is a powerful one. And we hear it through a lot of conversation where it links to being alone in this journey, and or that feeling. And actually then realizing, just by maybe even hearing your story today, Monique, hopefully it brought actually a lot of hope to a lot of other founders out there who might even want to reach out to you like, hey, Monique, I'm going through a co-founder conflict, would love to chat. So thanks so
Absolutely.
much for being very brave today with us and very open. It was a brilliant conversation. I enjoyed it fully.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My greatest pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. And I think this is definitely something I'm trying to practice more and more, is this vulnerability. So it's thank you for creating a safe space to do that.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Wasn't it funny when she was talking about performance? It resonated so much with the conversation we had earlier, and about the whole kind of, it was different people, right? But we talked on the one side about helping people grow, right? And on the other side, we were talking about performance. And I think she was wonderful. Monique was really wonderful, because she was so articulate about so many things, right? That it did feel a little bit like she was doing the podcast herself. We didn't really need to prod.
That's true.
But on the other hand, it's not something she has spoken about publicly.
Yeah.
So this is stuff that's kind of the results of her own work, but there's no blog post or a podcast where she talks about that.
Yeah. I'm curious if people who have gone or are within that similar type of experience, struggling with co-founders, whether it resonated in terms of like finding themselves in a, just emotionally, but also like physically and mentally facing similar challenges. I think just hearing from her also what ways, particularly the one where she really needed somebody else to allow her to heal and name stuff. I think that's a powerful one. And, I love the fact that she also mentioned that having a coach and therapist is costly, because indeed it is, right? So I feel it's important for the wider business community to really embrace this and put some money behind this and allow the wider community of founders to access this tool, because it's just not for everybody that I can put, monthly this amount of bucks behind it. Although I wish we all could, because it is so important.
There's so things I'm taking out of this is that, and again, going back to romantic relationships, that self-awareness about figuring out what's going on, even knowing that you're kind of plowing through it and you're putting your feelings into a box, is something that will allow you to come to that point where you will you give yourself permission to deal with it, right? But one of the things that we actually didn't talk about, and maybe it's important to put it out there now, is people underestimate that the majority of startups or early stage businesses that fail is either because they don't have the right product market fit, which is a business problem, but next on the list, very close, is founder conflict, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy to do this. It's not easy to have this really intense relationship with people that you don't screen through that filter. Because you usually get into business with people either because you've got a business affinity or because you've got a personal affinity, because they're friends. But ultimately, it comes with very different challenges and different expectations. Because you want, ideally, your co-founder to be, to some extent, your counselor, or somebody you can talk vulnerably about things. You
want to be able to rely, right? And when you are not well, just to hear that, don't worry, buddy, I'm gonna take it from here. You don't worry. But I guess, there's also still not that much of how to deal with that, like how to approach that. Like, I was just listening to one other podcast, which was saying about that need to really put together that agreement nearly as pre-marriage. Here it's the, shareholder agreement, whatever you call it, founders agreement, where there are some principles about, as I asked Monique, like, what do you do when it's not going well? But still, even as Monique shared, that doesn't necessarily solve for it. It might prepare you mentally. That's what I'm thinking. And that's what, I have been doing within my businesses. At least that's some practice. And the other is that we talk, like we try to put the hard stuff on the table as soon as it arises. It's uncomfortable, but I've seen even improvement on our side, with both of the teams, actually 3 teams I'm now engaged with, is that it feels less uncomfortable more you do it, which is kind of the natural process.
Yeah, it's a muscle.
Totally. It's encouraging. So I would say the communication about those stuff, which is just, feels not okay.
There was something, slight tangent, at the end when we asked her what would be the question she would ask at the beginning of her journey. And I realized that if I were to be asked that question, I actually, even if I knew the right questions to ask, and she kind of got me thinking about this, I would not know how to process the answers. So that experience point that Monique made is super important. So we're asking a question, but ultimately, maybe it's a bit of a funny one, because I can ask all the questions in the world at the beginning of my journey. I do not know what the answers actually mean until I've walked it.
Yeah. You've been listening to Naked by The Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. To learn more about our work, sign up to our newsletter or visit thefuturefarm.co, where you can also apply to be a Naked guest. Naked is produced by Dan Trgil, coordinating producer Alena Diamidava, and edited by Catherine Dworkin.
And remember, subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help share it with the world.